Welcome, everyone. Exciting day at OpenAir with our 100th episode of This Is CDR, and we're very pleased to have you here with us. This Is CDR is an online event series presented by OpenAir to explore the range of CDR solutions currently being researched, developed, and deployed, and to contextualize them for policy proposals we seek to advance really at every level of government here in the US, as well as national and subnational jurisdictions globally. My name's Toby Bryce, based in Brooklyn, New York, and I work on policy and market development for OpenAir. If you're not familiar with OpenAir, we're a distributed volunteer network dedicated to advancing the responsible deployment of CDR. We are a global community. We work together on projects that we call missions. They're all open source, meaning that you can join existing projects, you can start new projects in the areas of policy, innovation, communications, and activist market development. Here's a illustration of the kinds of projects we work on. Really, it's a wide range. And again, you can sign up for our group and get involved with what we're doing and catch on to an existing project. And if you have a specific interest, you can start a new project. That's what we're all about. So we would love to have you be a part of what we're doing. My colleague, Megha Raghavan, is running the chat here, and you'll be hearing from her shortly. And there are a bunch of links in the chat with background on OpenAir and also a form that you can fill out to join our group. Love to have you be a part of what we're doing. I want to highlight two policy missions that we're working on that are in critical stages right now and can really use support. If you live in Massachusetts or the state of California in the US, we have two state-level CDR policies that we're seeking to advance. Both have gotten some really great traction. The Massachusetts CDRLA, which is a state-level CDR procurement policy, sponsored by the amazing Senate Majority Leader in that state, Cindy Cream. And that policy is on the move, and it actually could advance and become law later this year. And if you live in Massachusetts, we really need your support to contact your state representatives and ask them to support the bill. Similarly, in California, state level negative emissions compliance market, super innovative, first of a kind policy, really important for the advancement of the field. And if you live in California, again, we would really love you to reach out to us so that you can contact your reps and ask them to support the policy. We have all the materials and tools. We have all the infrastructure, and we just need more voices. So please reach out and get involved. As always, before we start, 100th time, we want to define our terms here. This is a definition of CDR from a great resource called the CDR Primer. That we'll put a link to it in the chat. Great place to learn about CDR. It covers all the bases. Purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in long-lived products. Two really important things to talk about up front whenever we talk about CDR. Number one is to disambiguate CDR from quote unquote CCS, which typically refers to capturing CO2 from an emission source, whereas CDR is removing CO2 from the atmosphere. There's some subtleties there, but CCS is typically a form of emissions reduction and decarbonization, whereas CDR is removing CO2 from the atmosphere, which we're going to talk about in a second. We have to do. Number two, it's really important to clarify upfront, shout from the rooftops, that CDR is in no way, shape, or form any sort of substitute for reducing global greenhouse gas emissions as quickly and as completely as possible, full stop. That's 90+% of our climate work. We are behind on that work, and we need to continue to advance it. CDR cannot be used as an excuse not to move as quickly and as aggressively as possible on decarbonization. That said, there's clear scientific consensus that CDR will be required at massive scale by mid-century if we want to reach net zero and meet our climate goals. And the reason for that is that we are not going to be able to completely eliminate all greenhouse gas emissions in a climate relevant timeframe. They're going to be what are called residual emissions in the areas of agriculture, potentially industry, in the global south potentially, and other sectors that are going to need to be neutralized by CDR, meaning that we are going to need to remove CO2 from the atmosphere to compensate for continued emissions beyond our net zero target. The second half of the century, there are going to be trillions of tons of anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere, and we already see the dangerous state that our climate is reaching. And so in the second half of the century, we're going to need to continue to do CDR to remove CO2 from the atmosphere to restore our climate to a safer and healthier state. So it's an essential climate solution. We need to be working on it. It is not a substitute for reducing emissions. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Megha Raghavan, who is going to talk a bit about run of show and introduce today's very exciting speaker. Megha.
Hey everyone, I'm Mega. I'm an OpenAir member based in London, and I work on policy and market development as well as Toby. So just housekeeping notes before we start. We're going to have a short presentation followed by a few prepared questions from Toby and then moderated audience Q&A. Please do type any questions that you want to ask Phil into Zoom's Q&A box, not the chat box. Just please do keep them separate so that it helps us to organize what questions are still open. We'll send the video for everyone who registered, and we will also post it to OpenAir's website and OpenAir's YouTube channel. Okay, so this week we're very pleased to welcome Deep Sky Chief Carbon Scientist and Head of Engineering, Dr. Phil DeLuna, to discuss how the company is building large-scale infrastructure in Canada to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at an unprecedented rate. Dr. Phil DeLuna is a renowned scientist and carbontech innovator responsible for building Deep Sky Labs. Previously, he was a sustainability expert at McKinsey Company. With a PhD in materials science and engineering and a master's in chemistry, he's published over 50 papers in high-impact science journals. As a Forbes 30 Under 30 recipient in 2019, he was also a finalist in the $20 million Carbon XPRIZE. So Phil, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Thank you so much. First, I just wanted to say thank you for having me and congratulations on the 100th episode. It's a big deal, and I have a lot of pressure, feel a lot of pressure to be here to deliver on your 100th episode. So thank you. First, I wanted to describe who we are, what we're doing at Deep Sky. We are a technology-agnostic project developer and owner-operator of large-scale CDR infrastructure. We're starting with direct air capture, and then we're going to be quickly following with direct ocean capture. And in many ways, we're an oil and gas company in reverse, and our business model is similar to an oil and gas company in reverse. Oil and gas companies take carbon out of the ground, extract energy from it, typically through combustion, and then the CO2 goes into the atmosphere. We take CO2 out of the air, we use renewable energy to liquefy, compress it, and then store it underground. And just like how oil and gas companies don't necessarily build their own technology. What do they do? They buy catalysts from BASF, they license technology from Honeywell and UOP. They contract Schlumberger to drill their wells. But what do? They build the project, they project finance it, they own, they operate it, they refine their product, they get it to market, and they sell their product, which in their case is leading to massive amounts of CO2 to the atmosphere, and in our case is trying to help reverse that. And in many ways, I think it's a sign of the maturation of this industry. If you look at any other clean tech vertical, whether that's solar or wind, you have technology developers and you have project developers. Samsung and Panasonic, they build solar cells. They don't necessarily build the solar projects in your backyard or my backyard. They're fundamentally different skill sets. And so we are coming to market as a technology developer, or a project developer, sorry, not a technology developer. And we actually believe that there's an opportunity to test many different technologies, and there is not going to be necessarily one winner, but rather different technologies that make sense in different environments and different climates, and we're not going to know until we test them side by side. So first, I wanted to describe who we are in our story. Deep Sky was founded by Fred Lalonde and Joost Overkerk a few years ago. They're the co-founders of a company called Hopper. It's a $5 billion tech company in Canada that sells travel. A few years ago, they started offsetting the emissions of their customers by planting trees. They thought they were doing a great job. They went to go do PR about it, and they got slammed by climate journalists and activists who were saying that they were greenwashing. So that forced them to look into climate a little bit further, and they realized two key things. One, we're warming way faster than any of the models had predicted. And two, we can't just plant trees. It's not enough. We have to actually mechanically remove CO2 from our air and our oceans. Am I preaching to the choir by showing you and highlighting the urgency? I always love to start off this when I talk to folks who know what CDR is. But even in this space, we take a pretty aggressive stance. Toby and I were having an email exchange about the validity of IPCC models and conservatism and whether they go far enough. I'm on the opinion that they don't. But rather than debate that, I'm just going to show you some data. And we call this little narrative the collapse of the global carbon cycle, to be cheeky. But really, our hypothesis is that we may have already passed 1.5 degrees at 424 parts per million. We just don't know it yet. And so last year, of course, we knew was historic for many reasons. Lots of different climate targets were breaking. On the screen here, you see the temperature and the emissions over pre-industrial averages. There's no fancy modeling here. It's just an extrapolation curve to show you that we could be at the start of exponential growth. Could be. So now I ask, have we already broken the carbon cycle? The sea was the warmest and continues to be the warmest in all of recorded history in terms of sea surface temperatures. In July of last year, we lost 1.4 million kilometers cubed of ice extent in volume compared to 2022 at that same date. Here in Canada, where I live, 12.5 million hectares of Canadian forests were burned last year. That's a lot of carbon that's going back into the atmosphere. And a reason I think that we should be saying it's no longer enough to just do nature-based solutions. I mean, yes, we need to. There are many reasons we need to plant trees, but we got into this mess by taking carbon out from underground and putting it into the air. Mass and energy balance might state we should probably get out of it by taking carbon out of the air and putting it underground. And so these are the highest levels of CO2 since 1 million BC. Lots of people have seen this graph. This is the graph that are shown in all the documentaries to dispel the climate deniers that say that this is just a natural ebb and flow over hundreds of thousands of years. Clearly, this is beyond what a natural ebb and flow would be. But even beyond that, if you were to go backwards in time and ask the question, how far back in historical record would you need to go to even find 420 parts per million and above? You'd have to go 3 million years ago in the mid-Pliocene era. 3 million years ago, the average temperature was plus 5 degrees industrial era that it is today. Now, there are many reasons where we're not going to get to plus 5 degrees, many of which being the albedo effect and all of the ice extent that we've grown over the past few millennia. But that being said, it's still pretty striking. In the mid-Pliocene era, the temperatures were 3 to 5 degrees warmer. There were literally palm trees in the Antarctic. If you were to redraw the map of the eastern United States or the eastern North America, you would be 20 to 60 meters above present day level. Most of the eastern seaboard cities would be completely underwater. And the thing that we stress, and that's a lot of people don't realize or don't speak enough about, is pipeline warming and the delay and lag in maximum warming to emission. There's anywhere between a 10 to 50-year delay, meaning that even if we were to shut off all of our taps today and completely decarbonize, we would still have baked-in warming for years to come. That means that the warming that we experience today, the record-breaking 2023 that we just experienced, and the 12 months of plus 1.5 degrees on average that we just experienced, is coming from emissions, largely in part due to before I was born, potentially, before many of you were born. And so we have to ask the question, what happens if we break this carbon cycle? Right now, the Earth sequesters on net about 11 gigatons of CO2. The oceans capture about negative 6 gigatons or 6 gigatons of CO2, and we release about 33 gigatons. What happens if we break that? What happens if we hit tipping points, which are known, that disallow us to continue or break that carbon cycle in such a way that it's no longer negative 11, but it's negative 9, negative 8. Can it get to 0? Can it get worse? Can it actually release more CO2? We're already experiencing early signs of these tipping points. The West Antarctic ice disintegration is an example of this. You're looking on the screen examples of the Larsen B ice sheet as it melts. It's not just going to grow back. It took millions of years for this thing to happen. So even if we stop tomorrow and all of our emissions, do we expect all of that to come back? That's why 1.5 is so important, because it's a point of no return for many of these tipping point effects. Irreversible climate change is something that we have never felt or dealt with as a species, and we're starting to see it, I believe, now. Another example, carbon dissolved in the ocean, largest carbon sink is in the ocean. And if the ocean warms for every 1 degree because of Henry's law, that means there's an outgassing potential of 50, 80 gigatons. That's massive. The ocean's not going to warm by 1 degree. It's too big of a body. But I just want to illustrate the example of all these tipping points. We know of 12 to 20, and most importantly, we don't actually have an understanding or mapping of where these things will go if they get hit. So we know we have to do carbon removal. I say we have to do it even more than all of the estimates show, because I think that, one, even if we overshoot our carbon removal targets and we get down to 330, 350, 400 ppm, beyond just getting up to the 500 that the IPCC says is available in our carbon budget, is what's wrong with getting back to where we started in terms of our climate. So that is my little spiel on why we need to move faster. And I think as an industry, we need to be even more aggressive. And I know others will argue with me. Now I'll tell you why we think Canada is the best place in the world to do this. To do carbon removal, you need four things: renewable energy, capture, geologic storage. Then you need a mechanism to actually generate revenue so you can fund the whole thing. That's the distribution of credits. We know carbon removal works. We get that. We know that storage or capture is happening, and there are many different technologies that are being developed right now to try and do this in different ways. Solid sorbents, liquid sorbents, electrochemical, bio-based ways of doing this. The diversity of chemistries, both in air capture and also in ocean capture, pH swing being one of them, is astounding. The number of companies that have been developed or started since 2019, since the start of the Carbon Removal XPRIZE, has been incredible. I think it's over 1,000 companies by the latest numbers from Carbon Removal XPRIZE has published in their annual report, which is just astounding. At the same time, we know how to store CO2 underground. We've been doing it since the 70s, albeit the oil and gas has been doing it for enhanced oil recovery. Not great. But we do know how we can store it permanently and safely underground in reservoirs that aren't used for oil, in deep saline aquifers, for example. At the same time, there are companies like Carbfix, 4401, and Sella that are doing in-situ mineralization, pioneering this ability to take carbon dioxide and store it underground and mineralize it rapidly. And there are other companies that are taking mine tailings and looking at ex-situ mineralization at the same time. Canada has the capacity and potential to do all of this. So if we look at a map of Canada to really illustrate this. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping ahead here, a little bit of glitching. I'm just so excited. Anyway, I believe that Canada has a unique advantage in this perspective. First, if you look at the Western Canada, we have literally the capacity to store every single ton that humanity has ever emitted since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in Western Canada. At the same time, we have an abundance of renewable energy in the form of hydroelectricity. Quebec's hydroelectric grid is about 98% renewable, same with Manitoba, same with BC. Now that energy capacity is going to go away eventually, but we have it now and we know we can use it. And in fact, much of which is curtailed or sold down south to the United States at times of off-peak. At the same time, we know we also have an abundance of igneous mafic and ultramafic rock throughout the Canadian Shield. Now, it's older and more compressed and less porous than the young volcanic rock that you see in Iceland, but we believe we can actually do in-situ mineralization in Canada as well. And then finally, imagine a future where we actually capture carbon dioxide using the renewable energy in the east, and then we can transport it in the west. And what exists already today is a pipeline that takes natural gas from the west and brings it to the east. What a poetic reuse of that infrastructure to literally reverse oil and gas and take carbon dioxide, capture it in places of abundant energy, and store it in places of abundant storage. Canada has all of the resources to do this. We've identified 12 sites that have potential for gigaton scale carbon removal, and we're identifying more and more every single day. We have the energy to do this, majority of which is powered by 90% clean renewable electricity in Canada through hydroelectricity. In the long term, we hope to see nuclear power play more and more of a role. My vision for what Deep Sky Labs becomes is we start building these DAC facilities like data centers. You plop down DAC next to small modular reactors if and when they come available, right on top of storage, and completely eliminate transportation. But even in the short term, when hydropower becomes more scarce, when everyone is driving around in their Teslas and using heat pumps to heat their homes, Canada also has some of the highest potential for renewables. Southeastern Alberta has incredible sunlight. Parts of northern Quebec have the same wind speed density that you find on the offshore of the eastern seaboard. This is places where we could develop renewable capacity dedicated to carbon removal. Talking really quickly, so please, I'm trying to get through a lot of slides. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in a minute. Canada also has some of the best policies available for carbon, including a 60% investment tax credit, which is a capex reduction on every projects, rather than, for example, in the States, the 45Q production tax credit. Why this is important is because we're taking upfront right now, certainty, and it really helps to bring the capital stack together and bring forward a project to reality. What we need to do is go from labs and prototypes and pilots and get to infrastructure projects. The best way to do that is to, one, get off takes, and two, find ways to build a capital financing project stack in unique ways. And this CCUS ITC is one way to do that. We conducted a public opinion poll on Canada, and the public overwhelmingly in places that we've polled are positive. 86% of Quebecers are worried about climate change. 80% are worried about it causing wars and climate refugees. 81% are worried about it causing rising insurance rates. When we asked them about carbon removal technology, the vast majority, 76% of Quebecers from all parties, supported investment in carbon removal technology. 70% want Canada to use carbon removal to fight climate change. 65% believe it could be an economic benefit, and 60% believe that Quebec and therefore Canada could be a world leader. We are starting to do these public opinion polls all the way across Canada in every jurisdiction, and mapping it across political parties as well, because in order for this industry to scale, we need the public to be on side. And so what we are doing, as I mentioned, is trying to focus on the harder part of carbon removal, which is scaling and building projects. We do not develop technology. We are not a technology developer ourselves. And the way that we do that, and the way that we secure this from the perspective of first principles, is if you don't know which technology is necessarily going to win, why would you pick just one? That's why we're building what we're calling Deep Sky Labs. We're going to bring to Canada pilots of 10 different direct air capture companies, all of which are showing promising results. Test them side by side in the hottest day of the summer to the coldest day of the winter. If you can make it work in Canada, you can make it work anywhere in the world. The best technologies that we identify at Deep Sky Labs, we are going to scale and work together with those technology developers to build commercial facilities for Deep Sky One. What makes us different is we are bringing to the table the storage, the electricity, the operations, the permitting, the labor. We focus on all of the stuff that is hard, annoying, and difficult, so that technology developers can focus on what they do best, which is building their technology and their IP. Deep Sky Labs will be a center of innovation. We are going to have all of these 10 different direct air capture units side by side and funneling their CO2 into one consolidated balance of plant, where we will compress, liquefy, dehydrate, and have that CO2 ready for transportation and storage. We are building Deep Sky Labs to be the nexus of funders, suppliers, strategic partners, regulators, developers, and everyone in the space. If you are a technology developer building new DAC technology, the first thing you should think of is, how do I get my pilot to Deep Sky Labs? Because I will have a place to store, I will have renewable electricity, the world's attention is going to be on me, and I'll be able to benchmark and understand how I perform against my peers. So how do we determine which technologies and companies we bring to Deep Sky? There's really a few filters. The first is that we look for a pathway to low energy intensity, and all of the technologies need to be entirely powered by electricity. To us, it makes no sense to burn fossil fuels in order to capture CO2 from the air. It just doesn't make any sense. And so we're looking for technologies that can be entirely powered by electricity and have the potential to reach 1,000 kilowatt hours per ton of CO2 or lower at scale. Next, we look for simplicity and focus. Does your technology require many complex feedstocks? Does it produce an array of complex byproducts? As a project developer, what do we do with a megaton's worth of aggregates or acid or aggregate or all these other byproducts? Or hydrogen. We have to find technologies that do one thing well and one thing really well, that's CO2 capture from the air. Then we look at scalability and supply chain. We take an assessment of what are the proxies in existing industry? What is the largest of this thing that you can buy today? What would it take to build that? What does the supply chain look like? Is it ready? We go to our partners and we ask them, we are going to bring one of your pilots to Canada to assess it. If we come back to you and place an order for a 50,000 ton per year unit, how are you going to deliver? And can you deliver? To date, we've talked to over actually 90 direct air capture and direct ocean capture technologies to date. We've done tech due diligences. I've visited on site over 20 of them. 5 are going live by the end of this calendar year, with another 5 coming on live very quickly in 2025 here in Canada. And all of this, the first technologies that we're bringing on site are coming in the fall in September. The last one that's going to be coming on site will be in June or summer of 2025. I'm going to skip a few of this stuff. We're also building software so that we can make sure that all of the MRV is intact. We're going to be building APIs so that all of our auditors, regulators, policy folks, customers, investors will be able to access the data in close to real time, making sure that not only is our credit the most robust and reliable, but also the most transparent and the most fungible. I'm going to skip all of this stuff about the market because you know it all. The demand for carbon removal credits is growing rapidly. Avoidance is no longer going to count. And the market is moving carbon removal credits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I will say this. We are increasingly seeing demand for carbon removal credits from corporates. Why? I actually just published a piece in Forbes on this today. For a few reasons. One, many of them want to be seen as leaders in this field and start industry. Two, yes, decarbonization and meeting their net zero targets is important, but the volumes that are available today are so low that they're not really making a dent. So what they really care about is getting access to future supply, building relationships with suppliers and project developers today so that they have access to that when inevitably, in part three, many of these companies actually think that the prices are going to increase because the supply-demand gap is so large, and more of these companies that have set net zero targets are realizing as they reach 2030 and beyond that they have very little levers to actually meet them. So what do? Well, the only thing that they can do is start buying carbon removal credits to address their scope 3 emissions with which they have no control. CDR.FYI, which, by the way, I'm a huge fan of, an incredible resource, publishes and keeps on track. This is really even a little bit out to date. The top buyers and the top sellers, the majority of which is biochar today, because those are the ones that are most mature. But increasingly, we're starting to see more and more direct air capture deals. And then you have incredible companies and advanced market commitments like Frontier and others doing their part. So the market is growing. I think that what it now is a race to scale, which is exactly why we're so focused on building commercial facilities, not necessarily the technologies, but the infrastructure around them so that we can get to commercial as quickly as humanly possible. The way that we think about doing this is building our storage, our capture technologies right on top of storage wells that we're going to drill and own ourselves. This is an example, a prototype example of a potential project in Baie-Comeau, which is in Quebec. Access to renewable power, access to potentially a port nearby, access to other point source emitters to make up the rest of the volume when our direct air capture is ramping up, because the well is going to be able to take more than just direct air capture can provide. And the way that we're thinking about this is building this in tranches and stages. Right now, the way that projects are capital financed is you do one project at all. And it's very, very difficult to try and make the economics work when the technologies are so early. So we're looking at this as, can we build projects in 50,000 ton per year increments where we bake in over time and hope to de-risk both the technologies, but also the cost reductions through technology improvements, rather than trying to go to bat with a megaton plant right away. Of course, if you're a large oil and gas company like Occidental Petroleum, you can bankroll that. But if you're a startup, and if like many other project developers that are entering the space for the first time, you really need to be creative about how you're going to raise your project financing. And so ultimately, what we need to do as a field is bring the cost down as quickly as possible. We take inspiration from other industries, SpaceX being an example. So the cost of orbital delivery used to be between $51,000 and $66,000 per kilogram. Now, because of improvements and streamlining, cutting costs, and consolidating and vertically integrating, we've seen SpaceX drop that down to $1,600 per kilogram, with their goal of getting down to $200 per kilogram. We need to do the same thing. And what we're going to be focused on Deep Sky is, how do we build things bigger and bigger and bigger, and help our technology partners build things bigger and bigger and bigger so that we can get to those economies of scale. Ultimately, that is what needs to happen if we're ever going to get down from the $1,600 to the $3,200 per ton that it costs today to remove CO2 from the air, to a price point that, one, not only does it increase the number of buyers that are able to afford it, but two, also allows for more deployability and project financing to even accelerate it further. So that's Deep Sky in a nutshell. Happy to answer questions. I went really quickly. But what I wanted to really share with you today is our vision for how we can scale this industry as quickly as humanly possible, because we believe we don't have enough time. And I know the first half of this talk was all about climate, but sometimes I think you have to be a little bit more provocative than what the conservative baseline and status quo is today. So thank you. I appreciate your time and happy to answer any questions.
That was fantastic, Phil. Thank you for sharing all that. And yeah, let's not spend any more time on the climate stuff. I did put that post that we were discussing from former This Is CDR guest Zeke Hausfather in the chat that gives a little more context to the question. So I think we can all agree that we are in a climate emergency and we need to scale climate mitigation in many forms as quickly as possible, including CDR. Yeah, so that was a super great. I mean, first of all, we were talking about this earlier, but I've been so excited to watch Deep Sky, come out of emerge, and you're moving so quickly and addressing such a critical gap in the CDR ecosystem, which is like, how can we get these first of a kind demonstration deployments up and running? So thank you for all your work. And also, again, as mentioned, I've been a little jealous of your travels going to go see all these DAT companies that I've only seen virtually. So it's super, super great what you guys are doing. Wanna just drill down really quickly into the partnership criteria in terms of who you're going to work with, because I think it's really interesting. So basically you want it doesn't necessarily have to be direct air capture, but you want pure play engineered CDR that does not require inputs beyond energy and does not have any byproduct in addition to CO2 that needs to be stored. Is that correct?
Yeah, and actually, it is the direct air capture and direct ocean capture are actually the only two that we're currently looking to develop. And a lot of that also has to deal with the state of MRV registries, what customers are willing to buy, the robustness, the reliability of these solutions. Puro, for example, just released their draft methodology for direct air capture to geologic storage. The more that other pathways start to get recognition within these registries and laws in general and policies start to acknowledge them more, and there's a framework with which to operate them. Ocean CDR, for example, right now is a mess and it needs more maturation. Then we might consider and continue to break into those spaces. But ultimately, we really need to think about what is the most scalable and we believe tech-based and most robust form of removal. And today, that's direct air capture and shortly direct ocean capture.
And what about is it possible that sort of a high integrity novel BECCS process that takes residual biomass and does have CO2 to store could be in scope if there were a proximate source of feedstock, or is that kind of something you would rule out?
We're not focused on that. I mean, there are other companies that are looking at more bikers, for example. CO280 is an example of a project developer that's working in that space. And fundamentally, the reason is that if we believe we need to remove gigatons worth of CO2, then there does come a limit of the biomass availability. So we have to think about the feedstock there. And it's already difficult enough when you think about having to source renewables or clean electricity. What more to the logistics and also having to source biomass. So at the moment, we're not looking to develop those projects. There are other organizations, energy companies, for example, Drax, Ørsted, and others that already run bioenergy plants, and it makes a lot of sense for them to enter that space.
Yeah, cool. What do these partnerships look like from the what you call the technology provider perspective? You said, can I buy a 50 kiloton system from you? Is that what? Like, are you equipment purchase? Are you licensing? Is it a revenue share? How does that look from a supplier or from a technology developer perspective?
It's a really good question. Right now, we're open and flexible to all options, but broadly, they fall into three different archetypes, depending on which technology companies that we speak to. Some of them want to be OEM manufacturers. They want to build machines and sell machines, and we're more than happy to go that route, buy their machine, and then especially at scale. And some of them want to be a license and royalty model to demonstrate a certain scale. We then license the technology, further develop it. They get to sit back, relax, collect a royalty check for every ton of CO2 captured. And then finally, others are interested more in a joint venture agreement where we bring the storage, we bring the utilization or the electricity, we bring the permitting, help to really be the Canadian presence and develop a project locally in Canada, and then they bring the capture. Typically, what we're seeing in the market is that earlier stage Gen 1, Climeworks, for example, we have a announced MOU with Climeworks. They're really focused on more of the JV model, which makes sense. They don't necessarily need to do just OEM. They were also have made lots of commitments and have been selling credits on their own. So a joint venture makes more sense. But these newer companies where the market has started to mature and started moving more into the OEM space, and there are more companies, whether they're project developers or actually just heavy industry companies that are looking to purchase these units themselves for their own operations. And that is starting to happen more and more. So the more simpler method of it is OEM. And another thing on like how we work with partners, we do not want IP at all. So any intellectual property that our partner develops, owns, foreground IP is of course foreground. Anything they develop and own at Deep Sky, we don't want. They keep it. We don't want exclusivity either. If you're a technology developer and you want to go build another project in Canada, that's great. Because that means that you're developing your technology further. And when we come to you with a big check and ask for more, then your technology will be further along and your TRL level will be higher. So a lot of this like competition right now around IP and exclusivity, it's stifling. It's stifling like all of the project development. And what we really need to do is ask the question, how do we build things as quickly as possible?
And you mentioned Climeworks, but in most cases, will it be Deep Sky merchandising and selling the credits unless it's someone with an established brand and sales organization like Climeworks?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. So Deep Sky, ultimately, our product is a carbon credit. And what we do to generate that carbon credit and the things that we put into the project, we are, as an owner and operator, generating the carbon credit, developing all of the digital infrastructure, the MRV, the sensing, in order to deliver on that, negotiating with buyers, building all of that up. And in fact, we haven't announced it yet. So you and the attendees today will be one of the first. We're currently negotiating bundling the first 10 years of carbon credits that Deep Sky Labs will generate, even though we're going to be operating at a loss because all of these credits are being generated at very small volumes, so the cost per ton is very high. But we are pulling together a consortium of buyers that are at term sheet level now to actually purchase the offtake of the first 10 years of Deep Sky Labs. And the idea of Deep Sky Labs is not for just one technology or the first 10 that we bring on site. It's to be evergreen. And so what's really interesting about the sale is that these buyers aren't necessarily interested in just one technology, but they're interested in the portfolio approach and the ability to build a project. Because over time, one or two of these pilots, as soon as we know that they work or they don't work, we're going to rip them out and then have that pad available for a new technology company to bring their technology. And so therefore, we're always on the cutting edge of that innovation curve and allowing to move the field forward by having a space to test.
Yeah. And you said the Deep Sky Labs is more or less populated now, although there's some chance that you might be able to expand the number of pads. But for now, you're locked up with your initial cohort.
That's right. We've basically contracted. So Deep Sky Labs has a maximum capacity of 3,000 tons per year. That's largely driven by our balance of plant. Our limiting factor is our liquefaction and compression unit. The way that it works is we have pilots anywhere from 50 tons per year, their smallest, to 1,000 tons per year is our largest. And we're collecting the CO2 outgas streams anywhere between 80, many of which are above 95% CO2. And then we're compressing and liquefying that for transport. So that's the limiting factor. But we fully expect that because many of these are first of a kind units, that they're not going to be running at full capacity at one time. And there's also going to be a time delay gap. So there is an opportunity to expand. And we're actually actively looking at our engineering and balance of plant on whether we would be able to, for an incremental capex cost, increase the capacity of the facility by a few thousand more.
Got it. Cool. I appreciated the optimism of your slide about how demand is going to be scaling and increasing. I have seen in the market, I feel like it's very challenging for early stage direct air capture companies to be selling these early tons in the $600 to $800 gross price point. How have you seen the market of buyers for, it's one thing to buy, biochar at $100 to $200, but I feel like there is a limited appetite in the market for these novel first of a kind tons that are a multiple more expensive, 3 to 5 times more expensive. Have you seen appetite for that? Have you seen demand for those credits? I mean, obviously you have if you're selling Deep Sky Labs, but
Yes. Yes, we are. Yeah, and yes, we have been seeing demand and we have been seeing appetite. To give you a sense, we're selling the credits at 1,000 Canadian dollars, which is about $700 per ton in real money. And so yes, we are seeing demand for that. And it's interesting because there's a key piece there, which is early stage. I think buyers, especially corporate buyers, so there's a few buyers, right? You have buyers who are sophisticated, who have been active in the space, who have teams who are able to diligence, do tech, and go deep. But the vast majority, that long tail of corporates in the mid-range, don't necessarily have the margins, but two, also the technical talent to be able to assess and evaluate different approaches. And so everyone is waiting to see which ones are reliable. And it's less about the price point, I believe, and it's more about the risk of delivery for some of these companies and these projects. I mean, if you look at, I'll give you an example. Heirloom has been fantastic in selling lots of credits. They've at price points which are very high, and yet they're getting a lot of traction in the market because they're building stuff. And they're able to show investors, customers, buyers that there's a pathway and trajectory to them actually operating. So I think the appetite for carbon removal and especially high quality doable credits will only increase, especially as the pressure continues to get ratcheted up. The supply isn't there today. We know that. But more importantly, supply that people believe in isn't necessarily there today. It's going to take time, and many organizations and companies and startups are going to get there. But that's what people are waiting for, is they don't want to get burned. They've seen lots of maybe they got burned with the nature-based solution credits and many of those projects going up in smoke. So when we are contracting this, the biggest due diligence that they have is making sure that the MRV is airtight and bulletproof, and then it's on registry. So if you're looking to sell, you got to be on registry. You got to you meet additionality criteria. You got to have a clean grid. You got to figure out a 10-year offtake. You have to have rights. Like, all of this stuff is hard, and so this early stage, small volume stuff that Frontier, which is doing a great job in helping to seed the market, that's not enough to build a business, and that's the issue today.
Speaking of Heirloom and Climeworks, I want to ask about your energy requirement threshold of 1,000 kilowatt hours per ton, which neither of those companies can meet. So energy requirements, it's not this monolithic thing. There's power, then there's thermal, and thermal can be high heat or low heat. Can you break that down a little bit to us? Because there's some subtlety there. I mean, I definitely agree that I think for scale to gigaton, we need to be in that ballpark, but there are folks that have different arguments about that, whether thermal's different and there are different ways to get thermal. Then I have a follow-up question about CapEx, but would love to hear you thoughts on that.
Yeah, so when we say energy, we mean energy, and it has to be electrically driven. So what we're not looking at is high temperature processes, and if they are high temperature, then they need to be electrically driven. So I'll take this from the perspective of deployability. What we need to do as a product developer is find the perfect intersection of renewable energy and storage. We want to eliminate transportation completely and be able to build capture right on top of the storage, wherever that is. If we need access to waste heat, high-grade heat, low-grade heat, any kind of heat, then that means that you have to be co-located into an industrial park with an industrial source. That really limits your deployability. That idea of building data center like model of your already set design, you're mass producing these plants, and then you're plopping it down on top of storage goes out the window, and your where you can deploy is very, very limited. So it needs to be entirely electrified. If the actual regen process itself is based on heat, which some of the technologies that we're bringing to Deep Sky Labs are, then that heat needs to be electrified. There are those who are doing resistive heat, that are using e-boilers, that are looking at heat pumps. All of these are on the table, but it needs to be electrified. Now, why did we pick 1,000 kilowatt hours per ton of CO2? It may sound arbitrary, but we did the calculation from an energy budget perspective. People often think about the budgets in terms of dollar per ton. The marginal cost of abatement, the MAC curve. If you get below this amount, then it would be more effective to just do this route versus the other. Well, we could take that same approach and apply it to energy. at 1,000 kilowatt hours per ton, it ends up becoming a more energy efficient emissions reduction or removal mechanism than some other things, like, for example, sustainable aviation fuel, which is a very complex process. There's many losses along the way. It's not very efficient. You end up with a whole slew of different products. The biomass feedstock is limited, etc. So to, I guess, recap the answer, yes, heat, if can be electrically provided, and only if it's electrically provided, because we want to have the maximum deployability on top of storage as much as possible. And then why 1,000 kilowatt hours per ton of CO2? Because we think there's a tipping point there where you end up a large amount of decarbonization measures become, from an energy balance perspective, more efficient to do DAC than to deploy new technology.
No, I tend to agree, and I think that's a good point about the sort of where does the waste heat exist? I mean, that's going to be distributed, and I think that makes a lot of sense given your thesis. What about, so like marginal abatement does come down to cost, not energy requirements per se. What have you heard the argument from a DAC company that, yeah, our energy requirements are high, but we're super capex efficient, and so our net cost is good because maybe we have relatively high energy requirements, but our capex is much cheaper. Have you heard that, and do you buy that argument at all?
I don't buy it. I mean, I've heard it, but I don't buy it at all. And the reason is when you play it out over the span of a 20-year life cycle of a project, OpEx dwarfs CapEx every single time. And that's especially true in Canada, where we have the CCUS investment tax credit. So we have a 60% reduction on all of the equipment purchases that we make in the form of a rebate for our direct air capture project. So maybe your thing cost $1 billion to build, but there already 600 million of that is lumped off. Now you're at 400 million, maybe let's say half, because there are some things that aren't going to be covered that aren't direct material purchase. So 500 million. But over the lifetime of a project, it's all about energy consumption. It's all about energy consumption. And then it even becomes the question of additionality. If you're very capex efficient, but your energy consumption is super, super high, then there really does become the argument that those electrons would be better used to decarbonize other parts of the energy system. And I completely agree with your upfront assessment, by the way, that we need to be doing decarbonization. We need to be building renewables faster. We need to be doing all these things. The problem is that we're not. And so we need to at least have CDR as a backstop, which I know you know.
Yep. Last question for me, and I many more I would like to ask, but we want to leave some time for audience questions, and we have a bunch of those there that look really great. I just put a link in the chat to our friend Grant Faber's DAC company list, which now numbers to something like 180. So tons of innovation out there. How do you see the future of DAC shaping out? Do you think, so you guys are sort of a technology agnostic project developer. I think there's some, first mover, early stage DAC companies that have become project developers in their own right.
Out of necessity.
Climeworks, and I would put carbon capture in that category as well, and really not that many others. And then you have carbon engineering 1.5. Do you think that, like, if you're an early stage DAC company, do you think many more of them will evolve to become project developers, or do you think most of them, many will fail, obviously, just by the law of averages, but do you think that most of them will partner with project developers like you, or, Carbfix is a species of project developer in Iceland? How do you see the future of the DAC sector shaking out in that regard? Obviously a big question, but what are your thoughts on that?
For sure. I mean, like, I'm biased as a project developer, but I feel that the industry is going to move to that. I mean, just look at every other vertical, right? Like solar started out that way, wind, every biomass, everything. There's a reason why this is how you get big things built, because there are different skill sets. So, I mean, I applaud, and I think the technology developers who have morphed into project developers out of necessity do have that first mover advantage. But you become bloated, and it becomes more difficult to build projects or to improve technology if you're not focused on just one of those things, or you need to raise an incredible amount of money to do it. And money isn't growing on trees. There's lots of money out there. There's lots of capital waiting to be deployed, but you have to prove something first.
No, I think that's a good point. Like, how much more money is there to capitalize DAC companies at the level that Climeworks and Airlim have been capitalized at from an equity perspective? Excellent. Well, this has been great. Really enjoyed the discussion. I'm going to hand it over to Mega, who's going to start asking you some audience questions.
Cool. Yeah, we've got a bunch, and I'm just going to preface and say we're probably not going to get to all of them, so sorry about that, but I will do my best. Right, so just looking at the business models, someone asked why source so many different technologies and add that complexity. Is it a question of sort of hedging while we still don't know who's the winner, or how do you see that developing as it gets a bit clearer?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's hedging. So by having a portfolio approach, similar to like if you do this in investing, right? You take a portfolio approach and then therefore you de-risk your overall investment. We are investing in these companies and these partners by bringing them to Deep Sky. The pad that we offer is a pad that could be used to someone else. And so it's absolutely to hedge. And make no mistake, we don't believe that there's just going to be one winner. Like the diversity of different approaches and technologies and costs and it's incredible, and it surprises me every day that we meet a new company every week. If anything, there are going to be different technologies that work in different environments. What makes the most sense to work in Quebec is not going to be what works in Texas, is not going to be what works in Kuala Lumpur, wherever else. But being able to understand how technologies react to different temperature, pressures, humidities, and seasons is really important. And that's one of the draws actually of being where we are, is we get that full range. So yeah, the concept is really try before you buy, but two, try as much as you can.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Good. Quite a few questions about various aspects of financing. So one question was, what's your view on developing and financing projects with any kind of backing from oil and gas companies? And I know you mentioned like infrastructure potentially being something that we could repurpose. So yeah, could you just talk through financially and infrastructure wise how you see them playing a role, if at all?
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. I know there are some companies out there who have made a really clear stance. We will never work with oil and gas. They're the devil. We're not that absolute on it, but at the same time, we want to draw a line. So our line is we are happy to work with an oil and gas company because we recognize they have lots of expertise, especially in subsurface storage and moving gases and liquids and mass energy balances around and engineering big capital projects. We get that. But the line that we draw is we will not have them on the cap table. And then the specific question around project financing. Oil and gas companies aren't the one who are project financing things. It's project financiers. And so, we've been having conversations with pension funds, with project financing funds, infrastructure funds, and all of them say that you just don't fit the risk profile. They're looking for, a 10 to 15% IRR over a set period of time, low technology risk, all of these sorts of things. And so we need to find, unique, especially for the first few projects, we're going to hack together the capital that we need to finance these projects. But over time, and we fully believe this, as soon as you build one or two of these things, the amount of capital that will be deployed in this space by project financiers and infrastructure funds, who, by the way, their returns have been squished over and over and over again. Like you're not getting the same returns, double-digit returns that you used to on existing infrastructure projects today. A large part being interest rates and inflation, all these sorts of things. They're looking for places to deploy capital for growth. Carbon removal is going to be an industry for massive growth. So no, I don't expect us to take project financing from oil and gas companies. We will not have an equity investment from oil and gas companies, but we are happy to work with them, to learn how they do things and do it better and take what they did and clean up their mess.
Okay, great. Good answer. Cool. And then you also mentioned, I think someone picked up you saying Deep Sky being state-backed. Is that just like about the tax credits and subsidies that you mentioned, or is there more to that partnership?
Yeah. So we raised a 75 million Series A Canadian, so about 57 million in real money in the fall. $25 million of that is an equity investment from the government of Quebec. So one of our largest shareholders is the actual government. Through Investissement Quebec, which is their venture capital arm. But that's what we mean when we're state-backed. I guess you could say we're partially state-owned because they're an equity investor, but we're not a government entity. We're not a crown corporation. We're not any of that. We're a private company trying to build projects.
Got it. Okay. And is that do you see that becoming a bigger part of the equity investments that go into carbon removal? Like I haven't seen that many governments invest into at least project developers. So I'm curious if that's a model you see going forward.
I think so. I think it could certainly be something that happens. There haven't really been many project developers in this space, and I sincerely hope that we're one of many, or the first of many, I should say. And you know, it was a unique situation with the Quebec government. A lot of it was driven by, if you look at our leadership team, our co-founders, the folks that are on our board, you can kind of see the strategic pull that these people have.
Got it. Okay. Cool. We had another question about the renewable energy side of things, and I think the point more or less being that, you can do renewables, but getting it to run at a 24/7 uptime for a lot of these types of renewables is either expensive or impossible. So basically, just wanted, I think, a comment on like the price point for the energy that you're foreseeing and how that might develop.
Yeah, well, in Quebec, it's 3 cents per kilowatt hour, and hydroelectricity into the grid. So, like, I completely agree that as we scale to bigger projects, it's going to take a lot. But for our first commercial projects, it'll be like 50 megawatts, and there's more than enough capacity for that in the Quebec grid as stands today. Excuse me. Same thing with the BC grid, and especially the Manitoba grid, which has lots and lots of hydro capacity, much of which is actually exported down to the States today. But I take the point, in the future, when we're thinking about renewables, how are we going to be building this out? If the capacity factor is such that you have to overbuild, then the land use requirements for that are going to be super high, which make it very difficult. And like that's going to be tough. Energy storage can help play a part, but those technologies aren't necessarily developed yet. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Behind the meter, renewables are certainly something that we need to we need to push for in order to maintain highest integrity and additionality when we look at the registries. But ultimately, when I say renewable, I say non-emitting forms of energy, and that includes geothermal, that includes nuclear. The majority, or a large part, if not the majority, of Ontario's grid is nuclear today. So we need to think about how do we deploy that at off-peak times? How do we participate on the grid? Because a lot of the technologies that we're looking to deploy are electrical, and they're not these big massive catalytic converters that need 5 hours to ramp up to a certain temperature. You can turn them on and off a little bit more similar to an electrolyzer. So we have to start getting creative about load management and building the capability and software to manage that.
Okay, got it. Just one last one I wanted to ask. So you mentioned like what your product is a carbon credit, and is that sort of abstracted away from the underlying operator and like their costs and their sort of techno-economics and things that a buyer might be interested in? Like, how do you guys kind of set standards and it becomes a deep sky credit? And then how do you see that playing into regulations or standards that might develop and be sort of written into law at some point?
Yeah, we absolutely view it as a deep sky credit, and ultimately, again, I use the analogy of an oil and gas company, right? They refine a product and they refine a feedstock and they sell a product. Eventually, I believe the carbon dioxide, or like a carbon removal credit, should and must become commoditized so that it can be tradable, fungible, and then scale. And it no longer becomes these sort of business-to-business deals where the term sheets are opaque and no one knows what the value of this credit is, how long it's going for, what the price is. Eventually, we're going to evolve and grow up as an industry so that there's more transparency in the market. Again, shout out to CDR and FYI for doing a lot of work in that space. But when that point happens, people don't care, whether if you're buying wheat, people don't care whether you're using a Deere or you're using, another combine manufacturer. They don't care about the technology; they care about the wheat. Eventually, people are not going to care about, is it this technology versus this technology? What they're going to care about is the storage and the MRV and the LCA robust, reliable, transparent, and clear? And is a carbon credit a carbon credit? What is the permanence, additionality criteria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? We're early days in this industry, so a lot of people are excited about the tech. I get it. But no one knows the technology that is being used to make our food or even to process oil. Like, no one knows exactly what cobalt catalyst is being used in the Fischer-Tropsch reactor. So why is that going to happen here?
Cool. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Just very quickly to finish on that before I give it back to Toby, could you just remind us what registries you're working on, since I think a couple of people are interested in that?
I am not at liberty to discuss that at the moment. We're evaluating multiple registries at the moment. We did announce that we were working with Isometric to help them develop their JetDAC protocol, which has been a fantastic partnership. But in terms of which registry we are going to actually have Deep Sky Labs credits on. That is an active and commercial discussion we're having right now.
Fair enough. Thanks so much for everything, Phil. This has been great having you. And Toby, back to you.
Thanks, Mega. Great questions from the audience. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Phil, this has been fantastic. Great discussion. Super excited about how fast you guys are moving and to watch what happens next with Deep Sky. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone wants to reach out, I'm very easy to find online. Just Google my name. I'm more than happy to answer these questions offline. Thank you again.
Awesome. Everyone take care. We actually don't have another registration page live yet. But I will post our Luma URL where they will be posted. So there will be some new This Is CDR episodes posted shortly to enter into our next century of This Is CDR. Thank you to everyone for being with us. Thanks again to Phil. Everyone take care, and we'll see you again soon.